This is not just another YouTube channel. This is where things get real, exciting, and worth watching. If you're ready for content that actually stands out, go ahead and subscribe right now. Trust me, you won't regret it.
Drove 4 hours with a bottle of scotch in the passenger seat and a surprise anniversary dinner reservation on my phone. I was proud of myself for pulling it off. The secret booking, the coordinated lie to my husband about needing to stay late for a work event, the way I'd managed to get his favorite single malt without him noticing the receipt. I parked outside the rented lake house, walked up the gravel path in the dark, heard laughter through the open window, and stopped. My husband's voice. Clear and unhurried, the way he sounds when he's had 2 drinks and feels completely safe. She doesn't know about the policy increase. Never even asked about it. Someone laughed, and if the numbers work out, they do. I ran them twice. A pause. A sound of ice against glass. Her family's trust disperses at 40. She turns 40 in March. I stood in the dark holding a $280 bottle of scotch with a bow on it. By morning I was on a flight to Portugal. I left the scotch on the porch railing. I didn't leave a note. My name is Vivian Ashworth. Or it was, for 11 years. Before I married my husband and hyphenated myself into someone I no longer recognize. I grew up in a family that built its money slowly and kept it quietly. My father ran a mid-sized logistics company in Ohio. Not flashy, not dynastic, just solid. When he died 6 years ago, he left my sister Laura and me each a trust that disbursed in stages. First at 35, then the larger portion at 40. He believed in earning your independence before you inherited it. I used to tell my husband that story like it was charming. I realize now I was handing him a timeline. I met my husband at a conference in Chicago. He was in wealth management, which I found reassuring in the way that a person who doesn't know better finds certain things reassuring. He was confident without being loud. He asked good questions. On our 3rd date, he told me he looked me up after we met. Not in a creepy way, he said in an impressed way, and that he thought I was the most interesting woman he'd come across in years. I was 32 and lonely in a way I hadn't admitted to myself yet, and that was enough. We married 18 months later. My father's attorney suggested a prenuptial agreement. I told him we didn't need one. My husband had his own career, his own income. I trusted him. The attorney didn't push. The first few years were genuinely good, or I think they were. Looking back is like trying to read something through frosted glass. I can see the shapes, but I'm no longer sure of the details. What I know is that around year 4, things started shifting in ways I explained away one at a time. He began asking questions about my trust, the structure of it, the tax implications, what happened in the event of my death. I thought he was being financially responsible. He started joining me at my annual estate planning meeting with my father's attorney, which I'd always handled alone before. I thought it was sweet that he wanted to be involved. He suggested I update my beneficiary designations after we married. Of course I did. He was my husband. He started taking weekend trips every 6 weeks or so. Golf with colleagues. A fly fishing trip with his college friends. A retreat for his firm in the Carolinas. I never questioned them. I traveled for work myself. I understood needing that time. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't have imagined, was that a man who came home and made dinner and rubbed my feet while we watched television was also, somewhere in a separate compartment of his mind, running numbers. The anniversary trip was my idea. We'd rented a lake house the first summer we were together, and I wanted to go back to that feeling, to remind us both of who we were before we became people who passed each other in hallways and said we'd talk later. I planned it for weeks. I booked the same lake house. I ordered the same scotch we'd shared on the dock that first summer. I arranged to arrive early and surprise him. He'd driven up with his friends the day before for what he said was a low-key guys' night before I joined them. I wanted to see his face when he turned around and I was there. I saw his face. Just not the way I'd planned. The flight to Lisbon was 7 hours and I didn't sleep. I sat in the window seat with the shade pulled down and tried to process what I'd heard. My husband's voice, so calm. The numbers? March, 40. The policy increase I didn't know about. I'm a methodical person by nature. I don't fall apart quickly. I tend to go very still and very quiet first, and fall apart later when I'm somewhere private. On that flight, I went through everything I could remember from the past year, and then the year before that, and then before that, and I began to see the shape of something I had been standing too close to notice. The hiking trip where he'd insisted I go to the cliff overlook, despite my fear of heights. His hand on my back, just there, at the edge. I'd laughed it off. I'd felt silly for the flash of unease. The car that nearly hit me in the parking garage last February. He'd been on the phone 10 feet away. Back turned. I didn't see the car until it was almost too late. He'd been so tender afterward. So shaken, or what I'd read as shaken. The time I got sick on a camping trip. Violently, suddenly sick, after eating the food he prepared and he hadn't. He said it must have been the water. I sat in seat 24A over the Atlantic and felt the floor of my understanding tilt. I landed in Lisbon with one carry-on, my passport, a dead phone, and no plan. I found a hotel near the water, nothing expensive, nothing that required a credit card scan logged into a system he could access. I paid cash for the first 3 nights, drawn from an ATM at the airport before I'd been thinking clearly enough to worry about traces. Then I bought a prepaid SIM and sat on the edge of the bed in a room that smelled like old plaster and sea air, and I called the one person I knew would answer and not ask questions until I was ready. My sister Laura picked up on the second ring. "Don't react," I said. "I'm fine. I'm safe. I just need you to listen." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Where are you?" "I can't say yet, but I need you to do something for me. Don't tell anyone you've heard from me." "Not yet. Not even him." Another pause. "Vivian, what happened?" "I'll explain everything. But right now I need 24 hours. Can you give me that?" She said yes. Laura has always been the kind of person who trusts first and asks questions second. I love her for it. I was also suddenly, fiercely grateful that my husband had never managed to get close to her. She'd been polite to him and nothing more. I used to find that slightly annoying. That night it felt like the only solid ground I had. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The city outside sounded muffled and soft. Trams, a dog somewhere, water. I'd been to Lisbon once before, for work years ago. I hadn't been back. There was something about ending up here, in a city I associated with nothing and no one, that felt like my body had made the right decision before my mind caught up. I didn't cry that first night. I was too far inside my own head. The crying came the second morning when the jet lag broke and reality hit clean and hard. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth and I looked at myself in the mirror and I thought, he has been planning this. He's been measuring the distance between now and March and deciding when and how. I dropped the toothbrush. I sat down on the tile floor. And I let it come. I gave myself 3 days. That's what I told myself when I woke up on day 2. 3 days to breathe. 3 days before I made any moves. The first day was for shock. The second for grief, the third for clarity. On the second day I walked along the waterfront for 2 hours and let myself think about the good things. Not to torture myself, but because I think you have to let yourself feel the real loss before you can move past it. The loss of who I thought he was. The loss of the future I thought we were building. The loss of my own judgment, which is the one that quietly breaks you. On the third day I found a small cafe near my hotel with reliable Wi-Fi and I ordered coffee and I opened my laptop and I began. I contacted my personal attorney, not the one my husband and I shared, but the one I'd kept from before the marriage, the one who handled my trust. I emailed her from a new account I created that morning. I explained the situation in 2 careful paragraphs. I told her I was safe and that I needed to understand exactly what my husband had access to, what he could claim, and what steps I could take quietly. Her response came within an hour. The word immediately appeared several times. I also contacted a private investigator, a woman named Agnes, who'd been recommended by a colleague years ago for a corporate matter. Someone I'd filed away in my memory for reasons I couldn't have articulated then. I told her what I needed. Everything. Financial records, insurance documents, communication logs, any accounts I didn't know about. She didn't seem surprised. I spent the afternoon at that cafe table taking notes on a legal pad, listing every financial decision I could remember from our marriage. Every conversation about money, every document I'd signed. By the time I ordered a second coffee, the page was full and my handwriting had gotten smaller and tighter the way it does when I'm angry and trying to stay controlled. That evening, the hotel owner, a heavy-set man named Eduardo who had the permanent air of someone who had seen enough not to be surprised by anything, knocked on my door with a plate of pastéis de nata and a small pot of tea. On the house, he said in accented English. The sea air is good for thinking, but you need something in your stomach too. I thanked him. He nodded and left without another word. I ate both pastries on the balcony watching the light go off the water and felt something loosen, just slightly, in my chest. Agnes was fast and she was thorough. Her first report arrived 4 days later, and I opened it at that same cafe table, because I had decided that was my place for difficult things. Public enough that I wouldn't fall apart completely. Quiet enough to think. I read through it twice before I put the laptop down. The life insurance policy I knew about had been quietly increased 18 months ago. The paperwork showed my signature. I have never signed anything at that address, for that company, on that date. I was in New York for work that week. I have the hotel receipt. There was a second policy I had never seen or heard of, opened 14 months ago. Beneficiary, my husband. Payout $3 million. The signature on that document didn't even look like mine. There was a brokerage account I didn't know existed, opened in both our names, funded with money transferred from our joint savings over 11 months. Small amounts each time, 30 here, 40 there, just under the threshold that might have caught my attention in a bank statement I admittedly didn't review as carefully as I should have. The current balance was just over $400,000. There were texts. Agnes had noted them carefully without reproducing them in full. She was professional, but the summary was enough. His college friend, the one he'd been at the lake house with. 11 months of messages. References to the policy. References to March. One message, 4 months ago. She trusts everything. It's almost too easy. I sat with that sentence for a long time. I thought about what I had been to him. Not a person he had chosen and loved imperfectly, the way most people love, but a system to be navigated, a timeline to be managed, a trust fund with a heartbeat. I ordered a third coffee I didn't need, and I started making a list of what I was going to do about it. My phone rang on the 7th day, the prepaid one, which I'd given to exactly 2 people, Laura and my attorney. The number was Laura's. She never calls unless she has to. She texted to say she was calling so I wouldn't be startled. There's something I need to tell you, she said when I answered, and her voice had that particular flatness it gets when she's working very hard to stay calm. He called me. He's been calling me every day since you disappeared. At first he seemed genuinely scared, but today he said something that scared me. What did he say? He asked about your trust. He said he'd spoken to someone at a law firm about emergency spousal access in cases where a person is declared missing. He wanted to know how long that takes. She paused. Vivian, I think he's already. I know, I said. I know what he's doing. She was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I'm going to handle it. I paused. But I need you to do something first. Has he ever been inappropriate with you? Pushed you toward anything? Said anything that fell off? The silence lasted long enough that I had my answer before she spoke. Last year, she said, when you were at that conference in Denver. He stopped by the house. I don't know why I let him in. It felt rude not to. He made a comment about how you and I were different. How I was more. He used the word grounded, and then he put his hand on my arm and said something about how, in another life maybe, I changed the subject. I never told you because I thought I'd misread it. My jaw tightened so hard it ached. You didn't misread it, I said. I stayed in Lisbon for 2 more weeks after that call. I needed the time and I needed the distance and I needed to finish becoming whoever I was going to be when I walked back in. I found a yoga studio a few blocks from the hotel, which sounds like a small thing but turned out not to be. I went every morning at 7. There was a woman in the class named Suzanne, American, retired, had been living in Lisbon for 4 years after leaving what she called a life that stopped fitting. She started talking to me after the 3rd class when she noticed I always took the back corner spot and always left quickly. She said, I used to do that too. Take the spot where no one can see you from behind. I didn't know what to say to that. She didn't push. She started inviting me for coffee after class, and sometimes I went and sometimes I didn't, and she never seemed bothered either way. She had the quality of someone who had been through enough that other people's pain didn't make her flinch. One afternoon she said, without looking up from her cup, whatever he did, it says nothing about what you're worth. I hadn't told her anything specific. I hadn't needed to. I thought about that sentence for a long time after. I wrote it on the top of a page in my legal pad and put 2 lines under it. The other thing I did in those last 2 weeks was go through everything. Every document Agnes sent, every bank record, every policy. I organized it the way I used to organize case files for work. Chronologically, with annotations, source notations, a clear chain of evidence. I printed copies at the business center down the street and sealed them in an envelope. I emailed copies to my attorney, to myself on 3 different accounts, and to a secure cloud server I'd set up specifically for this. I was not going to walk into that room unprepared. I flew back on a Tuesday. I told no one except my attorney, who was meeting me Thursday morning with everything I needed. I didn't go home. I checked into a hotel in the city, one of those quiet mid-range places where the staff are professional and incurious. I slept 8 hours, which surprised me. I woke up without the heaviness that had been sitting on my sternum for the past 3 weeks, and I understood that what I'd been waiting for was to stop running and start moving forward. Thursday morning, I sat across from my attorney and went through everything. She had her own file by then. She'd moved faster than I'd asked, filing a quiet hold on certain joint accounts, flagging the forged documents with the insurance companies, looping in a forensic accountant. When I laid my documents next to hers, the full picture came into focus like something shifting from blur to resolution. Methodical, devastating, and impossible to dispute. She said, "You can take him apart completely." I said, "I know. Let's talk about how." I didn't call him. I didn't text. I drove to the house on a Friday afternoon, parked on the street, and rang the doorbell. He opened the door looking like someone who had been sleeping badly for 3 weeks, which I found satisfying in a way I didn't try to feel guilty about. He was in a dress shirt with the cuffs undone. He hadn't shaved. When he saw me, his face moved through 5 different expressions in about 2 seconds: shock, relief, wariness, calculation, and then the one I recognized as his default, the careful smile. "Vivian." His voice was careful too. "Thank God. Are you?" "I'm fine." I held up a hand. "Don't. Can I come in?" He stepped back. I walked into the house that I had half furnished and fully paid for and felt absolutely nothing for it. Not grief. Not longing. It looked like a stage set. I sat down at the kitchen table and I set the file folder in front of me and I folded my hands on top of it. "You increased the life insurance policy without my knowledge," I said. "You opened a second policy with a forged signature. You've been moving money from our joint account into a private brokerage for almost a year. And I stood outside a window at a lake house 3 weeks ago and listened to you explain to your friend exactly how the math works out if I'm gone before my 40th birthday." He was very still. "I would have been scared of this conversation a month ago," I said. "I want you to know that." I would have been shaking. I'm not shaking. "Vivian, whatever you think, you don't." My voice was flat. "I have the documents. I have the texts. I have the forged signatures reviewed by a handwriting expert. I have a forensic accountant's report on the brokerage transfers. My attorney filed a fraud report with both insurance companies on Wednesday. The forensic accountant's report has been submitted to the DA's office." I paused. "There's also a federal wire fraud component that I'm told makes this significantly more serious." His face had gone a color I'd never seen on it before. "Here is what's going to happen," I said. "You are going to sign the divorce papers my attorney has prepared. You are going to relinquish any claim to my trust, my assets, and everything purchased during the marriage with my funds, which my attorney has documented in full. In exchange, I will not push for criminal prosecution. The insurance companies and the DA may still pursue their own cases. I cannot stop that and I'm not going to try, but I will not be the one adding fuel." "You can't. I already did." I slid the folder across the table. "I need you to understand something. I am not doing this because I'm angry. No, I am. I'm doing this because if I don't formalize it, protect it legally, and close every door, you will find another angle. That's who you are. I've accepted that." He looked at the folder and he looked at me, and something in him seemed to understand that the person sitting across from him was not the person who had stood on the porch outside the lake house 3 weeks ago with a bow-wrapped bottle of scotch. That person was gone. He signed. "There is a last thing I want to tell you about, because it matters. Before I left that house for the last time, with the signed papers in my bag, I knocked on the door across the street. My husband had a younger sister, Holly, who had rented a small apartment 2 blocks away to be closer to family. She was 29, a teacher. The kind of person who made birthday cards by hand and remembered everyone's preferences and asked nothing in return. I had always liked her. My husband had borrowed money from her twice. I later learned, small amounts, framed as temporary, never repaid. He had told her I'd been struggling with my mental health, that my disappearance was likely a breakdown. He'd been building the same story for her that he'd been building for everyone else. She opened the door and her face crumpled when she saw me. I came inside and I sat with her for 2 hours and I told her everything. Not to hurt her, not to make her choose, but because she deserved to know who she had been protecting. She asked at the end, "What do I do now?" I said, "Whatever you want. But don't make yourself smaller to accommodate him anymore. You've been doing it your whole life." She nodded. She looked out the window for a moment, then she looked back at me and said, "I always thought you were the only person he brought home who actually saw me." I drove away from that street and I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I went back to Lisbon. That surprised me a little. I had thought it might feel like hiding, going back, but it felt like returning to somewhere I'd started to belong. Eduardo at the hotel gave me the same room without being asked. Suzanne was in her usual spot at yoga. I bought an expensive notebook at a stationery shop near the waterfront and started writing, not the legal documentation kind of writing, but the other kind, the kind where you try to figure out what you actually think about things. My attorney called a month later to tell me that the insurance company had filed their own criminal fraud complaint. The DA's office had opened an investigation. My husband had quietly left the state. I thanked her and I went back to my notebook. Lara visited for 10 days in the fall. She brought good wine and didn't ask many questions, and on our last night she said, "You seem like you again." I didn't realize how long it had been. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just poured her more wine. The trust dispersed in March, as it was always going to. I sat with it for a while before I decided what to do with it. My father had believed in building something before you inherited it, so that's what I'm doing. Building something. I don't know exactly what yet. But for the first time in years, that feels like possibility rather than failure. The scotch is still probably on that porch railing. I hope it rained on it. I don't regret the marriage, which surprises me when I think about it. I regret that I ignored the things I was told to look at. I regret that I ignored the years of myself I handed over without checking whether they were wanted. But I don't regret believing, for a while, that I had found someone worth trusting. That's not stupidity. That's just being human. What I know now, that I didn't know then, is this. The person who rang the doorbell that Friday afternoon, who sat across the table with her hands folded and her voice level and her evidence in order. That person was always in me. She just needed a reason to come out. I'm glad she did. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that night on the gravel path. Not in any grand philosophical way, just in the quiet, practical way you think about things when you're sitting on a hotel balcony in Lisbon watching the water and trying to understand how you got there. What I keep coming back to is this: nothing that happened to me was random. Not the good parts and not the bad parts either. Every door I left open, I left open. Every warning I reframed as something softer, I reframed it. I don't say that to punish myself. I say it because I think it's the only honest accounting, and I've found that honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, is the only thing that actually moves you forward. He was who he was from the beginning. People usually are. What I lacked wasn't information. There were signals everywhere, things my sister Lara noticed, things my father's attorney tried to raise, things I felt in my own body and talked myself out of. What I lacked was the willingness to let what I saw be what it actually was, instead of what I needed it to be. That's not a character flaw. That's what happens when you love someone and you want it to work. But I think there's a version of intelligence that has nothing to do with how much you know. It's about your willingness to look at hard things without flinching. I didn't have that at 32. I have it now. The other thing I've thought about is what it actually took to get up from that gravel path and not go through the door, not confront him, not demand an explanation, not try to save the marriage with more of the same faith I'd already spent 11 years on. Just leave. Drive away. Make a decision based on what I had actually heard instead of what I was afraid to accept. That took something I didn't know I had until I needed it. I think most people don't know what they're capable of until the moment requires it. Holly said something to me the last time I saw her that I've written down and kept. She said she'd spent her whole life making herself smaller to give him more room. I recognized that immediately. I had done the same thing. just with money and plans and the quiet erosion of who I was before I became someone's wife. What Agnes found in those documents confirmed what I already knew by then, but it also clarified something else. The consequences of his choices were always going to catch up to him. Not because the universe balances ledgers, but because that kind of behavior, the forged signatures, the hidden accounts, the calculated patience of waiting for March, leaves tracks. It requires lies stacked on lies, and lies stacked on lies are structurally unstable. Eventually, something gives. I drove away from that house for the last time with signed papers in my bag, and I felt nothing for what I was leaving behind. The particular weight of pretending not to see something you've seen. I don't think I'll ever let that weight settle on me again, not because I'm braver now, but because I know exactly how much it costs. The scotch is still on that railing, probably. I hope it rained on it for weeks.